Good evening and welcome to Coach World TV. My name is Terry Yoffe, and tonight I have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Dan Schaefer. Hi,
Hi,
Dan.
hi Terry. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, great.
It's great. Thank you so much for
You're
being
welcome.
here. Dan is quite an accomplished guy, I must say. He is CEO of Peak Performance Strategies, which is a company that provides a strategic competitive edge for individuals, companies, and professional and student athletes. And he is also the author of, I think it's his second book, is that
Yes,
correct?
right.
Click, which we will talk about tonight. So, Dan, I said a mouthful
Right, right.
there. So let's kind of break this up a little bit.
Okay.
So can you walk us through each of these categories that you work with, and just give us an idea of how you work with them each?
Sure. I think that what we've discovered is that people want to get a competitive edge. They realize it's difficult enough, Terry, to be in business today when you know you're in business.
Right.
But when you're in business today and you don't know you're in business, it becomes risky. And my belief is and it's the premise of this book, is everybody is a CEO of their own company.
Okay.
So when you get an individual to realize the CEO of their own company, they're responsible for everything that a CEO is responsible for. Business development, personal development, how they behave at the office, out of the office. If you can get a young person, a high school kid or a college kid, to see himself as a CEO of his own company, then you get a different set of results. You get kids that realize that every decision they make is a business decision. So what they eat, what they drink, what they smoke, who they're seen with, who takes their picture, what they put up on Facebook becomes critical to their future, because nobody today is ever going to be hired again if somebody doesn't Google them and Facebook them. And the stuff the kids put up on Facebook is unbelievable.
Yes, that's
And
true.
so, and then a person who's running a company doesn't do anything to destroy it. They do the very best they can not to do anything to upset the progress that they want. So every one of my clients today is in 2017 working backwards. I really only work backwards. Where do you want to be?
Wow.
What's the outcome that you want? And then let's look for anything that you could possibly do to foul that up.
Okay.
So, you know, and
explain a little bit.
well, you know, it's, I wrote the last chapter in this book is the first chapter of my next book, is that there's money in mistakes. I believe that everybody, if you're a coach, I know you're a coach, what you really do for your clients is you sell mistakes. You could give me a list of every mistake that you've seen your clients make before they became your client. And see, if you came to me and you were soliciting me to be a client, then you would want to know, you would want to play into the way my brain works. And the way that works is that there's a dynamic that's invisible in everybody's decision making. It's called short-term discomfort versus long-term regret. I may not want to hire you as a coach now, but what I really don't want is to be in 2017 wishing I did.
Interesting. I love that approach. You know, something that I do also is called a desired outcome. If you're going into a meeting, and I work with clients, what's your desired outcome? So you work and play to the desired outcome that you want to either walk away with, whether it's a meeting or an interview, or how do you want to be?
Right.
And you have we work on a timeline. You work a backwards timeline.
Right.
I usually work a forward
Right.
timeline. But very interesting.
But I think that's interesting, and we've talked a lot about how do I see the comparison between professional athletes and student athletes and coaching and business.
Right.
I don't know how many of you folks are football fans, but I look to sports because I can learn more in a quarter of a football game about a person's behavior than I can in months and months and months of assessments, because I find out how they operate under pressure and everything is compressed. I mean, in football, there's a 40-second play clock. Person has only 40 seconds between each play. My hockey players, who are mostly goaltenders, have to focus and concentrate dramatically. But I come back to this Super Bowl, and in Super Bowl III, for people who are familiar with it, Dave Herman was the right guard, protected Joe Namath. Am I going off a little bit here?
No, that's great.
Okay.
But that's great. I mean, I'm fascinated. I know nothing about.
But you see, that's the thing, is you don't really have to.
Right.
Because what happened is when I said to Dave Herman, He was 6'2", 250, and he protected Joe Namath from a guy who was 6'7", 365. And I said, how did you do that? He said, I watch game films. I said, what do you watch for? He said, I realize when a guy that big has got to move forward, he's got to stand on one foot a little bit longer than everybody else. So, and so he said, I just waited till his foot would come up, and that's when I hit him, and I caught him on 1 foot. So I say to myself, if here's a guy who's got 4 quarters and numerous downs to win a game, and there are people going out for a business interview, for job creation, for writing a resume, whatever it is, and they only get 1 shot. Today, they only get 1 shot.
Right.
If they would prepare for that the way they prepared for, the way Herman prepared for his football game, or the way my hockey players prepare for that, they'd do much better. But today we're running into another whole set of dynamics. I don't know whether you're finding this with coaching, but when I look at student sports, student athletes.
So what do you mean by student athletes? High
Kid
school,
who is, well, I'll give you an example. I have a client right now who's a hockey player who's playing for an Ivy League school. He was drafted to play for that Ivy League school when he was 12. The school saw him play. They went to his parents and said, we want him. And he had good grades, and he's playing through the system. But the point is that student athletes are kids who have a talent, want to go to school, want to get a scholarship, may want to play just in college, may want to play in the pros. I have one kid now who's one of the top hockey goaltenders in the country. He's going to play for the NHL, but he's just going into college now. But he wants to deal with a variety of things. And the biggest issue with student athletes, and particularly parents of student athletes, there's really 3 things that they're concerned about. On-field performance. How well do they perform when they're on the field? The second thing is academic excellence.
Right.
And the third thing is off-field behavior. How do you make sure that the kid doesn't foul up his career by mistaking his behavior when he's out hanging out with his friends? Parents can say, behave well. Teachers can say, behave well. But if the kid sees that what he's doing in college is a business, then he has to operate differently. And I keep them on that track. I'm not the parent who's, I have 5 kids. I play this game for my kids. But the point is that I will say, you know, you're in business for yourself. Is what you're planning to do tonight going to get you closer or further away from your business results?
It's really fascinating. I mean, you know, we could probably sit here for 3 hours
Okay.
talking about
Okay.
it. We don't have that much time,
just get some coffee in here.
Right, we don't have that much time. But so, would it be beneficial for business people, CEOs, presidents, whatever, to take a lesson from some of these athletes?
Absolutely.
In how they perform? I mean, one of the things we've seen a lot of over the last years is the downfall of so many of these financial institutions.
Sure.
And, you know, these are people behaving poorly.
Right.
I mean, that's, you know,
To say
I'm
the
not
least.
saying anything that
No.
has not been written.
Right.
Even today, is there something that these people can learn from professional athletes?
Sure.
I mean, I don't
Even
know.
well,
It's just a
no, it
question.
is because, you know, I had a very interesting. I guarantee golfers 3 to 6 strokes off their golf game without touching a club, using some of these strategies. Now, if you get a kid who's really a good pitcher or a good football player, good quarterback, has some trouble with school, what you'll find is that if he realizes that he can take the concentration strategies he uses to play his sport and bring it into a classroom, it gives him an edge. When he gets that, something happens that's quite unusual with my clients. They don't talk about it. I have a very poor referral system because my clients who are at the top of their game nobody ever gives them an edge away.
Right.
You'll have seminars for coaches and people. Let's share best practices. For people who are competing, they don't share their best practices because that's where the competitive edge is.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I just did a program for 95 hockey goaltenders last summer up in Massachusetts. Hour-and-a-half clinic, and when it was over, I said, any questions? And they said, no questions. So I said, how could 95 kids have no questions? And at the end, I had 40 kids in line that said, I would never ask a question in front of people who I'm going to be competing with for college and the National Hockey League. So it's looking at that, but understanding that dynamic takes place. But there's something else with people. You know, parents are challenged in raising student athletes because kids they work harder, they train and they go to school. So it becomes a difficult issue for them. So how do they help their kids in those environments? That's really important. So we do some programs for parents. A lot of the student athletes I have, their parents hire me to work with the kid.
Really?
Yeah.
And what is it you work with them on?
Focus and concentration. This will be something that everybody can try that's watching the show. If you sit up straight in your chair and you start to move your right foot clockwise, just sit up straight in your chair, move your right foot clockwise, round and round and round. And while your right foot's going clockwise, with your right hand, draw a big number 6 in the air. And when you do it, your foot goes backwards. Everybody's
You're
foot goes
right.
backwards. Well, the fact is what they work on distraction. You can't afford 1 second of distraction. So if you're playing if you're a hockey goaltender, and you have to stop a puck, you can't be focusing on your girlfriend who's sitting in the stands. So it's helping people identify a couple of things, where they, when they're distracted. The biggest distraction for professional athletes and people in general in business, and this is not just here, I've had clients in 16 countries. I've seen this in Asia, in Europe. The way they talk to themselves. People have to be very, very cautious about the way they talk to themselves. Because people who are coaches, I know most of us work with the unconscious mind, subconscious mind. Interesting thing about the subconscious, it never hears a negative command. So people who say, I don't want this to happen, I don't want to fail this test, I don't want to lose, find that they frequently do because their subconscious mind hears just the opposite. Ask anybody who's played golf, who stood over a hole where there's water, and says, I don't want to hit it in the water. It's going in the water.
They set themselves up.
And for people who follow football again, 2 Super Bowls in a row, when the Giants played the Patriots, the Patriots came in telling themselves, we don't want to lose this game. That's the first one. They lost that 4 years ago. This one, they said, we don't want to lose again, and they lost it again. Right. You have to avoid telling yourself what you don't want to have happen.
Right. So how could you reframe that? What could they have said?
Well, I want to win.
We want to win.
Now, winning is another interesting thing that happens today. When you have these little kids in these sandlot football things or little hockey games, parents will say, we're not going to keep score. We're just going to play the game. There's no score. We don't want any winners, any losers, and everybody's got to get a trophy. Let me tell you what happens. If you're coaching somebody and that person is looking for a job, they're going to find out very quickly that when they go to that job, they're not getting a trophy for showing up. They have to perform.
Right.
I did a program for a graduate school about 3 months ago, and I said to them, what do you all feel about winning? Well, I don't feel comfortable with winning. I said, okay, there are 2 people vying for the same job. Do you want the job? Yes. I said, well, if you get it, you've won. Oh, I don't like the way that feels. I said, well, then this is, because this is the real world. Even Bill Gates came back and said there's a tremendous disservice done to kids who don't realize that you have to train hard to win, and you can enjoy winning. But watch little kids. When my little grandchildren in Michigan play hockey, the parents are not keeping score. You know who keeps score? It's the little kids. They know who won. We won that game. We got that goal. So they keep score. But managing people who think they just have to show up is becoming a problem for people in business today.
So people think that if they show up, they've won, or they're
Why,
doing a great thing.
why not? They got a trophy for doing it all their life as little kids. The other
It's a
issue...
little different when you get out into the real world.
Oh, yeah, but, you know, when do you learn it? Do you learn it after your second interview or your third interview, or do you learn it? Or, you see, one of the things I think that where it comes into thinking about the future is, does somebody want to go into a job interview without hiring you? Does somebody want to try to coach their team without hiring you? Do they want to try it themselves? I mean, they're not rolling. In business today, you can't roll the dice. Not coaching your people. When I worked with Hewlett-Packard, they took their top people, they were nominated for a position, they were assigned a coach for a year, because they said, we want the person to move up in this, we want them to succeed, and when they succeed, we want to give them every tool they possibly can have. So we talk about toolboxes.
Right.
The big issue in my book about a tool, I think everybody that's watching this show, everybody has a toolbox.
Right. Tell us a little about, I mean, you know, I use that phrase too.
Right.
When I work with clients about what you've got in your toolbox and what you are aware of and what you're not aware of, but that's there. I agree with you. What you're not aware of is can cost you a fortune. Because if you have a toolbox, I mean, we know the 4 levels of learning. You know, unconscious incompetence. I don't know anything, and I don't know that I don't know anything. We run into people like that all the time.
Then conscious incompetence, I play blues guitar, I don't play sax. Then conscious competence, but when you get really good at something, you do it without even knowing it.
Right.
If you have a
Conscious
person who runs a
unconscious.
company, you have a person who runs a company, and they don't know what they do well, they can't teach somebody. So their skill is invisible. How do you teach it if you don't know you have it?
Okay.
So, I mean, it's one of the reasons that God made your arms so long, so you can pat yourself on the back from time to time.
Okay.
But again, you know, it's how you put this out, but it's always got to be put into a way that people will accept it and understand it. You're giving them tools. So if a kid who goes away to college sees himself as having a toolbox, rather than look at a class he doesn't like, he's going to say, listen, I'm going to go and open up this toolbox, see how many tools I can throw into the box, and then I'll know what's there.
Right.
But a lot of it is helping people identify what they have, and
Right.
sometimes they don't know how to do that.
Well, that's part of what I do with
Right.
clients, and I also use the analogy or the metaphor of bankable nuggets. So, you know, we all gather bankable nuggets from the day we start working, but we forget about them.
Sure.
And at any given time, I know I've been in sales and marketing, and when I became a coach, I didn't think about the fact that I could use my sales and marketing bankable nuggets until
Sure.
I pulled them out.
Sure.
So we always have these bankable nuggets or tools that we can draw upon and use
Right.
at different points in our lives.
But you pointed out an interesting factor here, is that you're a coach who is in business.
Right.
You know, hiring a coach, hiring somebody who is in business is different than hiring a person who just says they're a coach. So you need to
Yes.
have that skill, and somebody has to, just like they choose a doctor, they have to say, what's your background? And
Right.
if you've dealt with an international company, the kind of stuff you've done, that becomes important.
Right.
So people need to know to make a decision. The other thing that we talked about before we came in was the fact that I've got another part of a company that's called a confidential sounding board. I find that I thought that when I would work with people, whether they're a professional athlete or a CEO of a company, that when they did really well, they would refer me to other people. I found that's not what happens, because they keep their edge very quiet and under the radar.
That is true.
So to me, and I have this website called confidentialsoundingboard.com, is for people who are at the top of their game and have absolutely nobody to bounce anything off of. That's in sports. I mean, the foreword to my book was written by Chad Pennington, one of the top quarterbacks in history of the National Football League for accuracy. He chose not to tell his coaches or anybody that was working with me. Just worked privately. And we worked on business, and we worked on sports performance on the field.
That's interesting. It's an interesting concept. I primarily work with individuals who come out from the umbrella of their company because they don't want to get their company involved
Right.
in their whole coaching process. They don't want to, there's always a third party involved.
Right.
And I also work with entrepreneurs who have their own business.
Right.
But I do work with people that do go to their companies, and the company does pay for them
Right.
as well. But it's just a different dynamic.
There is.
I believe if you're a high-level executive coach
There is.
working with C-suite, you are working within the company.
Right.
And when an individual comes to me, they're paying out of their own pocket.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know this for a fact. I'm kind of making it up, but they have more at stake.
Sure.
In a way, because they are paying for it, and there's an accountability, even though
Right.
there is another level as well.
Right.
But I think it's a little bit different.
But if in doing what they've done, they've already also established a consulting company in addition to what they're doing, and they've got a DBA for that, they can write off working years,
Right.
so you become a business expense.
Right.
But I do
entrepreneurs.
think that's important for people to be able to do that, because they do need to get an edge, because
Right.
it is a very competitive
World
world
out there?
Yeah,
You're
sure it
very
is.
right.
Sure it
And
is.
Certainly, I love the whole competitive edge, because that's also what I work with. What's your competitive edge? What's going to get you, even in an interview? What do you have that the 12 people waiting out in the waiting room for the interview might not have? And how
Well-
do you present it?
Well, people today talk about who work very hard on a 30-second elevator speech. My belief is you don't have 30 seconds. You only have 6 seconds before somebody glazes over and leaves you.
Yes.
So if you can't stop somebody dead in their tracks with what you do based on a 6-second soundbite, I think you've lost it. You'll lose a lot of people.
6 seconds. Wow.
I mean, somebody asks me what I do, and the last chapter in this book is the next book we're writing called is Money and Mistakes, which you talked about before. When somebody says to me, what do you do? I laugh a little bit. I said, I sell mistakes. Nobody walks away.
Right.
What do you mean you sell
It's
mistakes?
catchy.
You
People
know,
want to hear more.
And the fact is then you have to have some stories about what you do and the kind of mistakes you sell. And everybody really sells mistakes.
That's true. That's a good way to put it.
Right, and it's cheaper to buy them from me than to make them yourself.
I gotta remember some of these quips here, Dan, because they're great. It's cheaper
Thank
to
you.
buy it from me than to do it yourself.
Sure it is. You know, it's
remember some
very
of these.
interesting the way people think about stuff. I had somebody call me to improve their golf game. And he was two-handicapped golfer. For people who are not golfers, that's a great golfer. And he said, could you meet me at my office? I said, sure. And when I met him at his office, we walked through a huge office. And he's talking about how my golf swing and all. We get into his office, he pushes all the golf material off the desk. And he said, this is not about golf. He said, I'm in the middle of one of the biggest mergers and acquisitions going on in the country today. And I have 5 months to persuade 4 people that I'm the guy to run it. So we spent 5 months on psychologically designed, structured conversations that he would have people based on some profiles we made of the people who were going to make the decision. He got the position, and I said to him, do you know anybody else in the same situation you're in? He said, sure I do. I said, you going to refer me? He says, no. He says, I don't want anybody to know you.
You know, that's so interesting. I love that. I really do. That, you know, we think we get a lot of referrals. I always ask for referrals, but I think I do get basically from clients referrals, and they're the best kind. But some I don't get, and I wonder if they don't want to let anybody know.
They don't want to let anybody know, and who are they going to talk to? Just take a professional athlete. Professional athlete who's making millions of dollars, stuff starts not to work. He starts to miss a catch, or he starts to not hit as well. He feels himself losing it. Like something's happening, he doesn't know what it is. He starts out by hoping that things will get better. When it doesn't get better, then what does he do? Who does he talk to? Can't talk to a coach, can't talk to his wife or his girlfriend. Who does he talk to? He sits with it by himself. And it eats on it, and it eats on it. And then he starts this, I hope it doesn't happen again, I don't want it to happen again, which comes back to our self-talk.
Right.
And so if you can stop that, just listen to the way your kids are coached. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. Turn it to positive stuff.
Right. It's a reframe.
It's reframing.
Right, exactly.
Because, you know, if people say, I wish my kid would listen to me. Well, if you put it out there in a way that unconsciously they could hear it. See, I have a statement on the back of a business card, and the business card says, every day and every way I get better and better and better. You take that business card and you give it to a kid and tell them 10 times a night, 60 days straight, just before they go to sleep. And they do it. Kids love it. But it's going to work for classrooms, and then adults say, can I have 2 more, one for me and one for my wife?
So one thing you brought up, and I looked through the book and we looked at some of the table of contents. I love the self-talk gets people in trouble. Tell
Sure.
us about what even people might even know what self-talk means.
Well, you know, people will hear a negative chatter in their head. This isn't going to work. You know, I can relate it back to business very easily. I was working with a client in Geneva on executive development, and he ran the largest division of Hewlett Packard's printer division in Ireland. And he said to me, you know, he said, I'm also a golfer. People said you could help my golf game. I said, well, as long as you don't tell the company. He said, anyway. But I said, he said, what should I do first? I said, give me a list of everything you hear yourself saying to yourself about this tournament you're going into in a week. Called me up. He said, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. He says, he never called me back. He called me about 2 months later, and he said, you know what happened? He said, the closer and closer I got to this tournament, the more and more I heard myself say, these guys are going to really beat you. They're going to embarrass you because they're better golfers than you are. He said, and they did. He said, I hit a 93, and it was a terrible score. He said, but what really got me is I was going into a multi-million-dollar negotiation the following week. And he said, I heard the same conversation about that negotiation, and I knew that I needed to get that taken care of. Sometimes people hear self-talk. Other people, it's invisible, and they don't hear it.
I think because they're so used to it that it's a way of life for them. They hear it, but they think it's them, you know, and it just goes on and on and on. It's a part of who they are. So it's it's invisible, but in a weird kind of way.
Sometimes when people are doing everything that they should be doing, everything that they say they should be doing, and stuff isn't working, they really have to come back and say, what's not happening? I had a guy who was a top commercial real estate developer, and he said to me, he said, you know, I'm in this negotiation, I'm dealing with some people, and I'm having some difficulty negotiating with them, so we worked on these strategies. He said to me, but I'm a 12 handicap golfer, and I can't play well 50 yards in, so that's for anybody who's on a golfer. 50 yards away from the hole, he couldn't play well. To make a long story short, what we discovered is the only time he couldn't play well 50 yards in is when he played against people who made more money than he did. And he makes high seven figures.
Wow.
Had a woman who works for a fashion designer in the city who couldn't close one client. And we discovered that the thing with that client was that the client routinely wore a $5,000 Armani suit. So when she saw the suit, she was knocked off her game, was intimidated by the wealth of the person she was dealing with, and did not do as well. It's important and costly for her not to know that. So we help people find that stuff quickly.
Yeah. So, do you have a website
Yes.
that you'd like to give?
Right.
That people might.
Dan Schaefer, DANSCHAEFER, PhD.com. My book is available on the website. I tell people it's available on the website.
Great book.
It's downloadable on e-books, and it's also available from the trunk of my car.
Okay. Does that mean that people have to find
No,
your car and
if they
chase
go,
after
no,
it?
if they go on the website, DanSchaeferPhD.com. Also on that, it's very interesting, talking about entrepreneurs, which we did before we started. There are a series of videos on there that you can take a look at that talk about a lot of these issues. That video production was done by a 14-year-old kid. You will not believe the work that this kid did. He's a genius. Yeah, look at the website.
So I love the cover. It's really great. So we've got a couple of seconds left. What would you like to leave our audience with? What words of wisdom from Dan Schaefer?
Do the very best you can to dream what 2017 looks like. And when you decide what 2017 would look like, it's not setting goals, just dream 2017, because your subconscious mind must act out every thought, image, or idea you put into it, and will do it relentlessly unless you get in its way. So learn to very quickly and fast track making use of your subconscious mind, because it will get you where you want to go while you're doing everything else.
And on that note, I want to say, I know it went very quickly. I want to say thank you.
Thank you too. This is great.
Yeah. It was nice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate your being here. It meant a lot to me.
Thank you. Thank you.